I'm going to have to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Oof, there was a lot, move to strike last word. There was a lot said there, but let me just say, when you're talking about the little guy, the Chinese Communist Party is not looking out for the little guy in America. The Chinese Communist Party is looking out for the slave wage Uyghurs who are making their products that are competing with the American little guy. And the American little guy is over here trying his best to make a living and is being undercut by intellectual property theft from Chinese agents who are funding these types of litigation. You know, the foreign governments are not ordinary market participants. This bill does not affect private litigation finance. The only entities barred from funding these U.S. lawsuits are foreign governments and their financial arms. These, as the ranking member said, pose unique national security and influence risks. When a foreign state funds litigation against U.S. companies or individuals, it opens the door to strategic manipulation, geopolitical manipulation, access to sensitive information during discovery, and the courts don't know. When you ask for numbers, it's happening. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the courts don't know it's happening. So we're just looking for basic information for the courts so that they can protect the integrity of the proceedings and the integrity of the American system and the rule of law, which should be protecting the little guy that you speak of. So that's why this bill is being introduced, and I just want to clear the record on that. So,
would the gentleman yield for a question?
Well, I'll be happy to yield after I yield to Mr. Biggs.
Thanks, Mr. Cline. I just want to cover just, again, a couple of the quick points of reported cases, because I get the question. I think it's a fair question to say, how big a deal is this? It's an estimated $16 billion deal. That's a pretty big deal. And while in our colloquy that the ranking member and Ben and Mr. Cline and I had, we talked primarily about the Purple Vine case, but we didn't ever get back to the 2024 case of the Russian billionaires who created specifically an investment fund because those Russian billionaires had been sanctioned by the US government, right? So they created a fund so that they could back bankruptcy lawsuits in New York, which allowed them to actually then launder money through the bankruptcy proceeding and get that money into Western financial institutions, thus getting around the sanctions that our own government had placed on them. So the fact that we learned about that is almost just serendipity. But this bill is basically designed to say, look, if you're a foreign government or you're a foreign government's sovereign wealth fund, you got to disclose. Failure to disclose means you lose. That isn't protecting the little guy. In this instance, you had the Russians going around our law. And in the Purple Vine case, it wasn't a little guy that would have been protected. It was Samsung. Samsung was in this litigation, and they're getting their intellectual property ripped off by the Chinese Communist Party. And in the other one, it wasn't a little guy. It was ExxonMobil who was being attacked by a billionaire who owned mines in Australia, who was funding lawsuits because he wanted to change policy within Exxon. That's the point. I understand it, and the mentality where you say, well, it's the little guys, because I get that, because we're seeing this right now. And quite frankly, in personal injury cases, which deals not with this case, this bill, but with the next one, in personal injury cases, what you're seeing now is something very different. This is where you're actually seeing loans being made by third parties to potential plaintiffs, the injured, right? That's very different than what this bill is getting at. That's why I think it's totally different. And then when the ranking member is bringing up these folks who oppose it, I happen to be with you on that. I don't like the other bill. But it's not this bill, which is very different. And I'll yield back to you, Mr. Cline. Thank you.
And I'm happy to yield to the ranking member.
Well, yeah, so if this were a bill then saying that people or governments that have been sanctioned by the United States government either are banned and prohibited, or it must be disclosed, that makes sense. I thought the first compelling argument I really heard that they were using litigation as a way to launder their money through the bankruptcy process. But I guess what I'm looking for is, what is the danger of, I mean, I'm assuming that these are just wealthy, you're banning the sovereign funds, right? But you're saying other governments can do it if it's disclosed, is that right?
That it has to be disclosed if a foreign government is.
Yeah, so one question about that, how does the judge determine whether there's a national security risk and therefore prevent them from
Well, it
participating?
doesn't have that
So it's not
standard in the bill. That's.
Okay, so it's not really about national security then. But then what is it about? If it's not, I mean, you're saying even if they were a national security risk, we're going to let that go. Well, what's the issue? And that's why I come back to the linkage between these two bills, because it's just really making it more difficult for people to get money if there are these international funds that have decided investing in American litigation is, through some other entity is a lucrative way to invest. Maybe we want to fundamentally change our legal system, but that is our legal system, right? And so people need money in order to go to court. And I'm not quite sure why, if the American judges and appeals courts and juries are in control, how it's a threat to our judicial system to allow them to invest in the litigation.
It's one thing if it's a foreign interest. It's another thing if it's a foreign government. And
Because
I think
why?
Why?
But how does it
Because
influence?
we don't want foreign governments influencing our judicial system with multi-billion-dollar lawsuits.
Mr. Chairman?
I've run out of time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
As I read this bill, though, the prohibition applies only to foreign governments, sovereign funds, but the disclosure applies to private funders as well. And so that's why, to me, the effects of these two bills are the same. And the concerns that we are raising around the second bill applies here too, because the disclosure requirements are not just foreign governments and wealth funds. It actually says person here. Name, address, and if applicable, citizenship or the country of incorporation or registration of any foreign person. So this is, the effects of the two bills are the same, and I think at the end of the day, it is about the little guys with a lot fewer resources that are facing big, powerful corporations, and I think you end up in a situation where the cost barrier alone determines who wins and who never gets hurt, and you end up disallowing workers and consumers and victims and survivors and small businesses any kind of a fighting chance. So to me, the two bills are the same in their effect. And lawsuits that wouldn't have been possible without third-party litigation funding, and here I'm talking about the second bill, but they include mothers suing a pharmaceutical company for cancerous baby powder, families of victims of school shootings, suing a gun manufacturer for marketing AR-15s to teenagers, small inventors suing large companies for stealing their creations, female employees suing an insurance company for discriminating against them through lower pay and fewer promotions. So even though you're making the distinction here, it seems to me that your bill is not, the prohibition is the only part that applies to state. I don't know if you want to, I'm happy to yield.
Well, Gentlelady, yield. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would just say that the Chinese Communist Party is not going to be the entity that is engaging in this funding. It is going to be using proxies. It is going to be using, it is, when you see Huawei engaged in this type of third-party litigation.
But this isn't Huawei, this is
No, well, you're talking about the second
person.
bill.
This is no, I'm talking about your bill.
Okay, well, yeah.
I'm talking about your bill on
They also
page
use
4. It
proxies
says
and individuals, and I mean, the
Okay, but
Chinese
then-
Communist
but-
parties will.
Reclaiming my time, but then there's no distinction. You're trying to make a distinction between the state and sovereign wealth funds and private individuals, but you're
trying to get at the
yourself
problem.
saying that there's no distinction here because you're saying that those foreign governments might fund through private individuals, but then you're collapsing the distinction right there. So it's not, I mean, I think that, again, the effects end up being the same, and I think that's why for those of us who are concerned about these bills, we want to make sure, and I think my colleague from Arizona mentioned this as well, but I think that we want to make sure that the little guy does have the ability to fight back. And so I just, I want to address the myth that third-party litigation funding encourages the filing of frivolous lawsuits. That's the effect of both of these bills, I think. Funders provide money on a contingency basis, meaning that they're not going to recover the loan unless and until the victim's case is resolved in a way that allows the victim to pay back the loan. And these funders finance cases because they believe the cases are meritorious and they have the high likelihood of success. Otherwise, they would lose the money that they lend to the victims. I had this comment for the second bill, but I don't know if we're going to get to that bill. So I'll just say that I also find it somewhat rich that my Republican colleagues ended the government shutdown last week, denied 22 million Americans the ability to stop health insurance costs from going up, but at the same time gave 8 of their Senate Republican colleagues the opportunity to sue the government, get millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded payouts in court for subpoenaing their records as part of the January 6th insurrection investigation. That's something that no other American gets to do, and it feels to me like that's just more rigging of our justice system to benefit them, but not you. So it's fine for them to sue, but not you. And with this bill, I think with both these bills, there's a real attempt here to stop the little guys from holding corporations accountable. So I'm a no on both these bills.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized for, I think, an amendment.
An amendment, yes.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
The amendment is at the desk.
Report.
And
Point of order been reserved. The clerk will report.
Amendment to the
Without
amendment.
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member, is recognized to explain the amendment.
the amendment compels disclosure in the interest of transparency of all the donors to the new White House construction project. The president has refused to disclose the donors, and he's also refused to say that they will not be either corporations or foreign governments or states or foreign government and foreign state sponsored entities. And so this just follows in the train of what we're saying. And if we can add this, I think it will put our side to the test. It will put your side to the test. And so if you guys can vote for this, it might be a little too much to vote twice against something that would not necessarily be Donald Trump's first choice waking up, but that's all about being the Article I lawmaking branch. If we think that the White House should be constructed either with public money, or if we're accepting contributions, the public's got a right to know who's contributing and what they're getting out of that, then this is the amendment for you. And so I submit that to the wisdom of the group, and it certainly follows from everything we're saying about not compromising national security and not compromising the integrity of essential public functions.
We will give you our wisdom, but we'll start with the gentleman from Arizona. Does the gentleman insist on his point of order?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized to explain their point of order.
I think the gentleman's amendment would introduce material that is beyond the scope and purpose of the bill before us. It violates House Rule 16, Clause 7, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland wish to.
Well, I